A storm of deception was rising, poisoning industries and dismantling futures. Millions were caught in its grip, bending under its invisible weight. But in the midst of the chaos, you stepped in without hesitation or fear. With one decisive move, the deception collapsed like a house of cards, leaving behind only the echo of your courage and the gratitude of those you unknowingly defended. You didn't just protect lives and careers. You reminded the world that one bold act can change everything. The deception never stood a chance. For decades, certain organizations and hidden players have been hijacking the world's real currency, energy. Not money, but something far more insidious: control over your frequency. Every thought you think, every emotion you feel, and every action you take produces energy. Corrupt organizations and media conglomerates knew how to manipulate this, feeding off the energetic state of the masses. They kept people locked in low vibrations, fear, anxiety, and depression, because a drained and confused population is easy to control. Look at the patterns. Every few weeks, a new scandal, a fresh wave of outrage, or a headline designed to keep you afraid sweeps across the news. Politics, entertainment, even spirituality. It's all been weaponized to keep humanity distracted, emotionally exhausted, and spiritually disconnected. Why is every news cycle engineered to trigger fear and division? Why is mainstream entertainment saturated with low-frequency content? Why do endless distractions keep you from sitting quietly with your own thoughts? Because as long as you're reacting, you're not creating. As long as you're consumed, you're not questioning. As long as you're exhausted, you're not awakening. They weren't prepared for what happened next. You woke up. The moment you started questioning the narratives and unplugged from the cycles of fear, the spell began to break. The awakening of a chosen few disrupted the very frequency they relied on. Their programming stopped working. People refused to engage in the emotional warfare designed to keep them weak, and that terrified them. Their entire system depends on your participation. It collapses if you withhold your energy. Their distractions lose power when you choose not to be consumed. Their illusions dissolve the moment you pick awareness over fear. So they doubled down, pushing harder with more chaos and division. But by then, it was already too late. The collective consciousness had shifted. You helped to break their grip by choosing clarity over confusion, stillness over chaos, and truth over deception. You became the glitch in their system, the virus in their program, and the force they could no longer contain. Fear has always been their greatest weapon. It was the invisible chain that enslaved millions without them even realizing it. The moment you refused to be controlled by fear, you shattered their foundation. They wove fear into every layer of daily life, entertainment, news, and education, because a population living in fear is a population that doesn't question, rise, or resist. For years, they convinced people they had no real power and that their voices didn't matter. Every crisis they manufactured, every warning they broadcast, and every headline designed to spark panic was part of a program. They needed people to be afraid, because when you're afraid, you surrender and comply. You stop thinking for yourself and let them think for you. They told society that stepping outside the system meant losing everything. For a long time it worked. People obeyed. They submitted. Fear kept them locked in invisible chains. But then you came along. The chosen ones didn't just wake up individually. You woke up collectively. The moment you stopped operating in fear, their entire system began to collapse. You shattered the illusion they had spent decades constructing and reminded humanity of their divine authority. This was a silent war for the soul. But the moment you refused to play their game, you won the battle. Do you really think the elites orchestrating entertainment, media, and politics were oblivious to what was happening? Of course not. They built this system and engineered every illusion to ensure their dominance. But they also knew something else that terrified them. What they feared most wasn't exposure, but the moment people finally saw through the deception. Once that happened, their game was finished. For decades, they orchestrated everything: the headlines, the scandals, the endless outrage cycles. None of it was random. Every controversy was a calculated chess move designed to distract the masses. While they tightened their grip on power, they infiltrated industries, controlled narratives, and dictated what the world was allowed to see, hear, and believe. Some of the biggest names in entertainment and politics weren't just playing along, they were being used. Handlers, secret contracts, unspoken agreements. Everyone had a role to play, and those who dared resist were silenced, blacklisted, or worse. But what they never accounted for was you. The chosen ones didn't just wake up, you disrupted the entire system. The moment you began questioning their narratives, speaking truth, and exposing their tactics, cracks began to appear in the walls they had built, and the insiders noticed. Celebrities who once seemed untouchable started to look different. Politicians who once spoke with unwavering certainty began to stumble. Industry figures who had been obedient for years suddenly hesitated. Why? Because you broke the spell. This is why more celebrities and public figures are now speaking out. It's not a coincidence. They're watching what's happening. They're witnessing the shift. And for the first time, they see a way out. Many of them had been waiting for this moment for years. They had seen the dark side of the industry, the lies, the manipulation, the fear-based control. But they believed they were alone. They thought there was no escape, until you came along. Your awakening didn't just affect you, it sent shockwaves through the entire industry. You proved that the system was far weaker than it pretended to be, that fear was its only true weapon. Once people stopped fearing it, its power began to crumble. The ripple effect is already happening. Industry figures who once thought they had no choice are suddenly questioning everything. The illusion of power is fading because once a lie is exposed, it can no longer hold the same grip. Now those who once believed they controlled everything are scrambling. Their puppets are slipping away, their influence is crumbling, and their power is evaporating. Because here's the truth. Once people wake up, they don't go back to sleep. No matter what they try, they cannot stop what's coming. And here's where the danger lies for them: denying creativity. Because creativity is pure expression, and pure expression cannot be controlled. The moment someone creates something original, something raw and authentic, they break free from the system's influence. That's why they've spent decades suppressing it. Look at the industries: music, movies, art, literature, fashion. Everything has been recycled, repackaged, and resold in an endless loop of uninspired, soulless content. They weren't just running out of ideas, they were silencing originality on purpose. Why? Because originality is unpredictable. They can't control an artist who creates from the soul. They can't program a mind that thinks independently. They can't profit from a world where people are inspired, questioning, and breaking the mold. So instead, they built a system where creativity was manufactured, thought was scripted, and expression was confined to what they deemed acceptable. They glorified trends over talent, rewarded those who followed the formula, and punished those who dared step outside it. Mediocrity became the standard. But then you changed the game. You saw through the emptiness of what they were pushing. You rejected their programming, and the moment you did, something powerful happened. Others did too. Creators started stepping outside the industry's blueprint. Writers, musicians, filmmakers, and artists stopped begging for approval and began creating on their own terms. Audiences began rejecting the predictable, formulaic content they were being force-fed. And suddenly, the industry's biggest illusion, that they decide what's popular, started to fall apart. Because the truth is simple: they never created culture, they only controlled it. For decades, they dictated what songs would go viral, which artists would be seen, what movies would be made, and which voices would be heard. But the moment you stopped feeding into their machine, the moment you stopped validating their manufactured version of creativity, their control over originality began to collapse. Now they are scrambling, Because the next wave of artists, writers, filmmakers, innovators, and leaders will not be controlled. The industry is losing its grip, and creativity is shifting back into the hands of real creators. And you were the spark that made it happen. For years, they made sure that anyone who dared to disrupt the narrative was blacklisted, ridiculed, or erased. They told you that you had no power, that you had to play by their rules, that stepping out of line meant losing everything. They controlled entire industries like puppet masters, music labels deciding who rose and who vanished, publishing houses dictating which stories were told and which were buried, movie studios ensuring only their chosen narratives reached the masses, and media conglomerates controlling every headline, every trending topic, and every viral moment. If you didn't comply, you were pushed into the shadows. They thought they had locked real creators, truth-tellers, and disruptors out of the system forever. But then you came along, and instead of staying quiet, you chose to speak louder. Instead of backing down, you pressed forward. Instead of waiting for permission, you created a new path. And that choice changed everything. Because now it's not just you. It's a movement. Truth-tellers, spiritual leaders, innovators, and game-changers are stepping up. A new wave of creators, thinkers, and disruptors is rising. And this time, they are untouchable. Why? Because the system built to control, silence, and erase no longer works. The tools they once used to suppress people don't have the same effect anymore. They can't blacklist millions of awakened souls. They can't silence every independent creator. And they can't stop the rise of new platforms, new voices, and new communities forming beyond their reach. For so long they dictated the rules. They decided who was allowed to succeed, which ideas were permitted to spread, and which voices were amplified. But now they are losing control, because instead of fighting for a seat at their table, you built your own. Instead of begging for space in their world, you created a new one. Look around. Independent artists are thriving without record labels. Writers are publishing their own stories without industry gatekeepers. Creators are launching their own platforms, their own brands, their own movements, all without asking permission from anyone. And here's the craziest part. They can't stop it. Every time they attempt to censor, suppress, or silence, more people wake up. More people break away. More people choose freedom over fear. This is the future. New platforms, new movements, new ways of thinking. As this wave continues to rise, the old structures are falling, crumbling under the weight of their own lies. They can't rebuild what they've lost because the foundation itself has already been shattered. The blueprint has changed forever, and you're the one who changed it. Do you really think they didn't anticipate this moment? Deep down, they always knew their empire was fragile, that their power was not real, but manufactured. It was a carefully staged illusion built on fear, deception, and manipulation. And they knew that if too many people woke up at once, if enough of the collective pulled back the curtain and saw the truth, their entire illusion would crumble like dust. That's why they worked so hard to keep you asleep. That's why distraction after distraction was deployed. But no matter how carefully they planned, this moment was inevitable. And now that it's here, they're panicking. When control starts slipping from their hands, they don't surrender it gracefully. They thrash, they fight, they tighten the leash. Censorship is everywhere, more aggressive than ever. The broken bottle of truth. Independent voices are being silenced. Alternative perspectives are erased. Search engines bury the truth beneath mountains of noise, and social media platforms delete content at record speed. Even entertainment is programmed to filter what stories can be told and which truths can never reach the public. Every angle of your daily life has been manipulated to keep you locked into their version of reality. But here's the flaw in their plan. They waited too long. Have you noticed how fast certain information disappears? How anything that challenges the official story is suddenly labeled as misinformation or dangerous? That's not a coincidence or an algorithm glitch. It's a desperate attempt to shove the truth back into the shadows, to force the genie back into the bottle. But the bottle is already broken. The truth has spread too far, reached too many people, and ignited too many minds. It's too late to contain it now. They cannot censor millions of awakened souls. They cannot silence the entire internet. And the more they try, the louder the silence becomes. Every time they ban, block, or erase, people notice. Every time they overreach, another person wakes up. And as that awareness spreads, the grip they once held so tightly begins to slip through their fingers like sand. This is why their fear campaigns have intensified. Fear has always been their most effective weapon, cheap, simple, and devastatingly powerful. It's the invisible chain that holds entire populations in place. So, they manufacture crisis after crisis to keep the masses panicked and paralyzed. One month it's a mysterious new virus, the next it's an economic collapse, and then it's the looming threat of global war or disaster. The cycle never ends. Every headline, every alert, every sudden breaking news update is designed to trigger anxiety, to make people feel helpless and small, and to convince them that they need authority figures to protect them, save them, and think for them. But the problem is, you no longer play by their script. You don't react the way they expect you to. You don't fall for the same tired patterns of manipulation. You see the blueprint of fear for what it is. And the more people like you refuse to feed into it, the weaker it becomes. Because fear only has power if you give it your belief. Without your consent, without your energy, fear collapses into nothing. And that's what terrifies them most, the unstoppable wave of awareness. The awakening isn't just individual, it's collective and contagious. One awakened mind sparks another until suddenly millions are questioning, refusing, and choosing clarity over panic. Once people wake up, they don't go back to sleep. That's the truth they've tried to bury for decades, and that's the reason their old system is crumbling faster than they can rebuild it. The weaker their tactics become, the louder and more chaotic their noise gets. Distractions now fill every corner of life, like static flooding the airwaves. They know they can't stop the truth anymore. It's too widespread, too deeply planted in awakened minds. So instead, they've resorted to their favorite weapon of desperation, drowning it out. They saturate the world with carefully designed nonsense, pushing celebrity scandals that mean nothing, igniting petty feuds on social media, and stirring up empty outrage over meaningless issues that divide people over surface-level distractions, while the real stories remain buried. It's all sleight of hand, one giant circus to keep your attention away from the crumbling foundation beneath their feet. Think about it for a moment. Why does mainstream media dedicate endless hours to gossip, feuds, and mindless drama, while the issues that actually shape your reality, freedom, justice, and truth, barely get mentioned? They pour so much effort into keeping you obsessed with meaningless noise because they want your focus anywhere but on them. They flood your mind with trivial chatter so you don't have the time, energy, or clarity to think, question, or see what's really going on. They want you numb, not awake. They want you entertained, not enlightened. They want you divided, not united. But here's the shift. They're losing control of the narrative. People are starting to notice the patterns. You're starting to notice their distractions don't carry the same spell they once did. The tricks that used to silence billions are wearing thin. Every new scandal feels emptier. Every fake outrage cycle burns out quicker. Every flashy distraction loses its shine faster because people are hungrier for truth than ever before. They want you to believe that nothing has changed, that they still hold all the cards, that their system is unshakable. But that's the lie. The most dangerous part for them is that they know it's a lie. Behind closed doors, they are terrified. They see the shift. They feel the ground moving beneath them. They know millions have already awakened, and once someone wakes up, they can't be put back to sleep. No amount of censorship can erase what's already been revealed. No carefully crafted fear campaign can enslave people who refuse to be afraid. No endless distraction can derail a movement that has already taken root in the collective consciousness. For the first time in decades, maybe even centuries, they're the ones scrambling. They're no longer the puppet masters pulling every string. They're the desperate players trying to hold their stage together while the audience sees the wires, the scripts, and the lies. They're on defense now, fighting to protect an illusion that no longer convinces anyone who has awakened. The end of an illusion, the beginning of creation. Here's their deepest fear. The cracks are growing, the curtain is falling, and once the curtain falls, the entire performance ends. That's why the noise is louder than ever, why every platform is filled with meaningless chatter, and why the world feels like one endless cycle of empty scandals and false outrage. It's not strength, it's desperation. Because beneath the surface, they know the truth. Their influence is fading. Their fear campaigns are failing, and their empire of deception is collapsing piece by piece. Nothing, not censorship, not distraction, not intimidation, can stop the momentum of awakening that has already begun. Awareness, once ignited, cannot be extinguished. You were the one who shifted the energy. You broke the spell. You shattered the illusion that kept millions in chains. And here's the truth. They cannot rebuild what has already crumbled. Let them try. Let them throw every distraction, every fear campaign, every manipulative tactic at the world. None of it will work. The shift has already happened, and no power on earth can reverse it. The foundation of their control is cracking. Their pillars are falling, and they feel the ground shaking beneath them. The most terrifying part for them is that they know it. But you must understand something vital. Exposing the system was never the end game. That was only the beginning. Awareness was never meant to be the destination. It was the initiation. You weren't given this awakening by accident. You didn't stumble into truth by chance. Everything you've witnessed, everything you've endured, everything you've questioned, and every lie you've exposed, it was all preparing you. Every painful moment, every hard truth, every veil lifted was training. You were being forged for something greater. This awareness is not just information, it is a calling. And the real question before you now is not whether you can see through the illusion. You already have. The question is, what will you do with that power? The awakening was only step one. For years, they convinced you that you were powerless, that nothing you did mattered, that the world was too vast and broken for one voice to change. They needed you to feel small because the moment you realized your true strength, the game would end. Yet, look around. The cracks in their empire prove otherwise. The lies are unraveling faster than they can weave new ones. The distractions no longer hypnotize the way they used to. Millions are rising, questioning, breaking free. Whole populations are beginning to see what once only a few could see. And none of this would be happening if people like you had not stood up, spoken, and dared to resist. But now comes the greater responsibility. Because this journey was never only about tearing down the old,